Hey guys, and welcome back to the Layah Heilpern show. Joining me on the show today, we have the author of the Uncommunist Manifesto. He's a freedom maximalist, YouTuber, Bitcoin educator, and podcast host on iHeartRadio. And he's also a partner at the Bitcoin Opportunity Fund. Mark Moss, welcome back to the show. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not welcome back to the show. It's my first time, but I'm excited to be here.
No, we did. We did.
Oh, we did. Yeah. Okay.
We did. So I remember
not
we
officially
did
like this.
Right. We did a virtual one, and I actually found that really educational, by the way, and I really enjoyed it. So that's why I'm really excited to have you here in person in the studio.
Yeah, me too. I'm glad it worked out.
So what are you doing in Miami before we get into all of this? Before we hear what Mark has to say, I want to bring you some good news from our sponsors, CoinX. CoinX Crypto Exchange has now rebranded its wallet via wallet to CoinX Wallet. This move signifies CoinX's commitment to the Web3 space, ensuring they stay ahead of the curve and consistently offer the best to their users. As a pioneer, CoinX Wallet is committed to solving difficult industry problems and meeting the needs of the users. CoinX Wallet Shuttle wants to make far away a way by helping users experience the magic of Web3 while avoiding potential risks, ensuring the safety and growth of everyone. CoinX Wallet is your gateway to the future of finance, with features like DID identity, asset management for NFTs and tokens, fast transactions with one click, easy swapping and staking, and authorization detector for enhanced security. The wallet offers a seamless experience for managing your crypto assets. Download now to enjoy a range of crypto assets. Also, guys, from Jan 12th to Jan 19th, as long as you download the CoinX Wallet app, you have a chance to share 5,000 CET prize pool. So, what are you waiting for? Download CoinX Wallet. The link is in the description below.
It's Art Basel week here in Miami. I didn't come last year, but I was here the year before, so it was pretty cool. Last time I was here, I was at a party at Michael Saylor's house, which is pretty fun. But this time, Valuetainment had a party. They're obviously kind of sort of headquartered here in Miami. I've been kind of wanting to get into that camp. I got an invite, so I was like, well, I'll come out. I know you wanted to sit down and record. I had a couple of things that I could do, a little road show. So I'm in town for fun, a little bit of work, and then I'm out of here.
That's the thing with Miami. It's just always buzzing. There's so much happening. There's so much going on with the Bitcoin space, crypto space, content creation space.
Yeah.
That's what I love about it. There's always somebody coming and going, you know?
Yeah, I know. And I'm in Southern California, and you would think LA would be sort of similar, but it's not. You don't really have the influencers or creators or whatever you want to call it. You certainly don't have sort of like this Bitcoin crypto space. And so it's sort of dead out there, surprisingly. I have a pretty nice studio out there, and it's like hard to get people to come down there for it. So it is a pretty cool scene here.
Would you move here?
No.
Why?
No, I wouldn't move here. Southern California is a very unique place in the world. And because I grew up there, I have a very unique life that just most people just don't have. And so because of that, so I believe that there's nowhere that you can go to have it all. So for me, I live on the beach. Like I'm 3 houses off of the sand, and I surf multiple times a week. And then within a 2-hour drive, I can be snowboarding. And so I snowboard all winter. And then right out of my house, I can ride my mountain bike because I have a mountain range that runs right next to the ocean. So I could ride my mountain bike in the mountains. And then I ride dirt bikes. And so on the weekends, I can go out to the desert. We have all open deserts that I can go ride my dirt bike. There's nowhere in the world I can go do that.
Yeah.
I certainly can't do any of that here in Miami.
That's very true. We are limited.
So I do like it. It's fun. It's a fun event. I come here a couple times a year typically, but I usually can't wait to leave.
Really?
Right now the traffic is just atrocious, and that's coming from LA, so the traffic is really bad. I love all the restaurants. I love all the water. I like the people, but I mean, I want to go home.
I get that. No, I mean, if you live, just 3 houses from the sand, that's incredible.
And I have a ranch I bought in Texas, so just outside of Austin. Austin's a really cool city. I love the people there. There's a really good group of content creators and Bitcoin capital, sort of. There's all that going on there as well. But man, it's so cold in the winter. It's so hot in the summer. There's like bugs everywhere. I can't mountain bike, dirt bike, snowboard, surf. I can't do any of that. So it's like, the quality of life is almost the same. Well, the quality of life is better in California because I can do those things. As far as like the freedom side of things, like Gavin Newsom is like the biggest slime ball in the world, and like California is gnarly. Like it's not a good place to raise kids and all that stuff. But like my life is really, my day-to-day life is no different there than it would be in Texas or Florida or whatever. As far as like a freedom level, my standard of living would be, well, my cost of living is more expensive. California is very expensive, but like I don't optimize my life off of like I ate at a very expensive steakhouse last night. I could have ate at McDonald's, right? But I didn't do that. So my cost of living is higher, but my standard of living is higher as well.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I think if you're happy where you are and everything's perfect and your standard of living and your quality of life is amazing, then why move? So the question that everybody wants to know now, and I think it's the best way to sort of introduce Bitcoin and the podcast and everything like that, is what is going on in the market right now? Obviously, we have the halving about 6 months, I think even 5 months away. The price is pumping. We saw yearly highs of $44,000. So what is causing that pump right now? So let's just begin with price.
There's a lot of things that I think are causing it. So let's start with the small stuff, and then we'll get to the bigger stuff. So I think from a small level, there's a bunch of different catalysts. So one, there's the ETFs that are happening. So you got BlackRock, like the largest asset manager in the world, sort of a quasi arm of the government. So we saw like in 2020, they worked with the government to like buy stocks in the market through these bank collapses. We saw earlier in 2023, they worked with the government to like sort of help bail out the banks and things like that. So they're sort of like this arm of the government, and they're launching a Bitcoin ETF, which is a pretty big deal for a bunch of reasons. A lot of people still think that Bitcoin's stupid, magic internet money, blah, blah, blah. When the largest asset manager in the world doesn't see it that way. The largest asset manager in the world, Larry Fink, was on CNBC 3 or 4 weeks ago now, and he said that people are moving to Bitcoin as a flight to safety. Mm-hmm. And so if you think it's stupid, but the largest asset manager in the world say people are flying to it to safety, like maybe you should recheck yourself, right? Success leaves clues. Like he's very successful. So I think there's that. So the largest asset manager in the world. In addition, there's about 5 or 6 others that look like they could potentially go through. And so people think there's going to be this massive demand for Bitcoin when this goes through, and I do as well. I just made a video saying that there's a warning in this though, and so I'll break that down for you. But there's this big push, and one, 72% of financial advisors said they would recommend Bitcoin and crypto if an ETF was approved. Oh, wow. So just think about that, right? So there's going to be a massive long-term demand, and so everyone's trying to sort of front-run this news. So I think that's catalyst number one. Catalyst number two is you mentioned the halving cycle. So about every 4 years, the new supply of Bitcoin gets cut in half. And so while financial markets can be very complex, they're actually very simple. All price moves on supply and demand. So if the demand stays the same, but the supply gets cut in half, then the price goes up. But if the demand goes up with ETFs, et cetera, and then the supply gets cut in half, then it's obviously very dramatic. So I think that's another catalyst. And so if you look at sort of the price chart of Bitcoin over a 7, 8, 10-year period on a log scale, you can see it move in these 4-year cycles. And so that's sort of where we're at. So I think that's the other catalyst. But then I think there's a bigger catalyst. And this is a bigger catalyst, not just for Bitcoin, it's for assets, and it's also for fiat currency. And that trend is that we are witnessing, I just spoke at a Bitcoin conference in Amsterdam, and the title of my talk was The End of the International Monetary Order. Okay. So what does that mean? Everyone says like the dollar is going to die, end of the dollar, the BRICS going to replace the dollar, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not just the dollar. We're witnessing the end of fiat currency. The international monetary order, the system that we've had for 50 years or really 100 years since Bretton Woods, that's ending. And so what do I mean by that? We're in a 50-year experiment of fiat currency. So gold had been money for 5,000 years. In 1971, we broke the tie to gold. And so we've been in this now for 51, 52 years of floating fiat currency, paper money. And it's an experiment, and it's gone horribly wrong. And it's starting to fall apart. And so what we're seeing globally, and people are just starting to wake up to this, I hate to use the word the global elites, but the sovereigns, the people pulling the strings, they've been buying up hard assets as fast as they can for the last year. China's bought half of the lithium mines in the world. You have the OPEC countries, Saudi Arabia, Russia saying we're going to pump less oil because we'd rather have the oil in the ground. GM Motors, the largest automobile manufacturer in the U.S., said that they spent $650 million on a lithium mine. Again, they'd rather have the minerals. Everyone wants to buy hard assets. They don't want U.S. treasuries. They don't want paper dollars anymore. And so we're witnessing a small-scale ETF boom, on a larger scale, the 4-year halving cycle. But really what we're seeing globally is everyone's moving to hard assets, which is why even though the Fed's gone on this fast rate hiking cycle, even though recession 2024, 2023 never came, 2024, whatever, like home prices aren't dropping. Stock prices aren't dropping. As a matter of fact, asset prices keep going up, and that's because people don't want to hold paper dollars.
And why don't they want to hold paper dollars?
Well, they don't want to hold paper dollars because, so you have sort of there's several camps of economics, but let's just divide them into two. You sort of have like this Keynesian economic camp, which is basically we just print money, modern monetary theory, MMT. And then you have sort of like this Austrian school of economics, which believes in like basically sound monetary principles, right? And in that camp, sort of the godfather is Ludwig von Mises. And he wrote something called the crack up boom. And it starts out by saying, and then suddenly the people realize that inflation is both permanent and intentional.
Yeah.
And once that happens, they start to lose trust. I don't know the rest all off the top of my head, but they lose trust in the currency. And then they want to get out of it as fast as they can into whatever they can. And so if you look at Venezuela, Lebanon, Turkey, etc., they don't want to hold that Turkish lira. They don't want to hold, those types of currencies. And they're trying to get out as fast as they can. And it's happening all over the world. The dollar is still the best currency in the world, but it's also happening to the US dollar as well. The world realizes now that inflation is intentional. And it's permanent. So just since 2019, the government, the U.S. Treasury, has increased their spending by 50%. 50%. They bring in about $4.5 trillion of income and spend about $6.5 trillion. $2 trillion. 50% of their budget is printed every single year, and that's up 50% just from where it was a couple years ago. And so that's why gas is up and homes are up and steak and milk is up by 50%. And so people realize this now. Now, if you've noticed on mainstream media, the Biden administration, the White House, KGP, et cetera, they're like putting out even news headlines saying, inflation's not because of money printing. They're like trying to gaslight us. But they understand it's a problem, which is why they're saying that. No, you have it wrong. Inflation's not because we did this. No. People know.
But they're also saying that inflation is coming down.
They're also saying that, right? So they're saying both, right? And I did a video in January, and I said, the pivot's here. And what do I mean by that? The pivot, the Treasury, the Fed has been on this path trying to bring inflation down, as measured by the CPI, Consumer Price Index. And I made a video in January because in January, the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is the one that makes up the CPI basket, changed the calculation of the basket.
Yep.
Now, they've changed the calculation many times, but in January, they made a change. And instead of taking a 2-year comp or a comparison over 2 years, they moved it to a 1-year comp. The reason why that's important to understand is because inflation is measured year over year. Last December to this December. And so in January, I said, based off of where the numbers were last year, this is what this year will look like if nothing else changes. And I said, if no inflation changes, by September, we'll be at 3%. And we were. And it wasn't because I have this magic ball. It was just math.
Right.
It's like, hey, if you compare off of last year, because last year we were at 9%. So when we're at the highest point ever, of course, it's going to look lower. So I think there's part of that, but also there's just massive amount of lying.
Yeah.
So like, let's just look at the last CPI rating numbers that came out, for example. They said that health insurance costs went down by 32%. Where did that happen? My monthly insurance bill didn't go down. Did yours?
No.
I mean, the costs at the hospital are so, like, where did they come up with that?
Yeah.
But yet they threw that out there.
Right.
Another thing they use that's very shady is that they don't use home prices. Home prices are known. We have the MLS, they're in a database. We have all types of data on that, but they don't use home prices. To figure out what home prices are or what they consider shelter in the basket, they use a owner's equivalent rent. How do they determine that number? Through phone surveys. Well, I ain't answering no phone survey. Are you?
No,
no one is. Who the hell is answering a phone survey, right? So
Right.
nobody. So they have like almost no sample sizes. No one's getting any accurate data. And so to put this into comparison, we can look at like rent.com tracks the rent prices year to year. And this is like actually off of data from like actual leases that get signed, but the BLS doesn't use that. And so they go after the survey type data, and they said that there was like a 0.2% increase in rents when we know rents like doubled. And the reason why that's important is that rent, that shelter part of the CPI basket makes up 30% of that basket. So anyway, one, they changed the calculation. Two, it's completely lies. But what they're doing, and this sets up a bigger thing, but what they're doing is they're giving themselves cover to be able to start easing again, which is why in January when that happened, I said the pivot's here. They're giving themselves the cover because they have to win the war on inflation.
Yeah.
So they just changed the calculation. Hey, congratulations, we won. Now we can go back into easing again because the U.S. Treasury is going to go bankrupt if we don't start easing again. And
when will that happen?
Well, I mean, they're technically already bankrupt, but like we're kind of going closer like this. I can break that math down for you. But real quick, so one, by changing the calculation, we bring CPI down. And two, with wars, now we have an excuse for inflation. So either way, the Fed sort of has this cover they need to kind of go back and pivot without losing credibility.
That's insane. When do you think the printing will start?
Well, So first of all, the printing is sort of like that's not really how it works. We talk about the Fed printing money.
Yeah.
The Fed doesn't print money. The banks print money.
Mm-hmm.
So when the banks issue loans, then money is printed. Right now, lending has been going down because there's not as much appetite for it. The banks haven't been wanting to do as much. But as far as like the Fed's policy as easing, so we consider them going from QE, quantitative easing, to QT, quantitative tightening. Easing would be buying treasuries. Tightening is selling off treasuries, as well as tightening the market by raising the price of money. If I sell iPhones for $1,000 and all of a sudden I say, hey, I'm going to sell iPhones for $200 for the next week, do I sell more iPhones or less? More.
Yeah.
Right. If they went from 1,000 to 200, I sell more. Right. And so when I lower the price of money, people borrow more as well. If I say, hey, money is 8%, and now, hey, you can get as much money as you want for 1%, a lot of people go get it. And so when they raise the price of money, they tighten it. People get less of that. Right. And so the question is when will they go back into an easing? Well, I think they already have. Okay. So we saw in March of 2023, the banks collapsed. Within 6 days, the Fed set up a facility called the BTFP, the Bank Term Funding Facility, and that $100 billion went out to the banks. That's printing money. I mean, that's what we call it. It's technically something different, but that's easing, if you will, right? Now the Fed, the last Treasury auction, so the Fed or the Treasury is spending so much money, there's not enough buyers for that debt right now. And so the last 30-year auction that we had massive what we call dysfunction. There weren't enough buyers for the amount of Treasuries they were trying to sell. And so the Fed trying to tighten can no longer sell their Treasuries when the U.S. Treasury doesn't even have enough buyers. So we're there. That's the problem. And so what happened, because there weren't enough buyers, the price of those treasuries went up, or I should say the yield the treasury has to offer went up. It's what we call a tell. They wanted to pay this. By the end of the auction, they had to pay this, and it was the worst one we've seen in over 50 years. So it's a really big deal. So I think we're pretty much already there. I expect at this next FOMC meeting, the Fed meeting next month, it'll be December 13th, I believe. I expect the Fed to sort of formally announce the pause. A pivot might be considered when they actually, because they've been tightening or raising rates. A pivot would be when they stop raising and go back to lowering. I think they'll pause, which means hold them for a while and then start to lower them. I think they're going to continue to hold them high for a while because they need credibility. If they pivot and lower right away, they're going to look bad. So what they'll do is they'll probably pause, but they'll be injecting liquidity. So it's like a stealth QE. So they look like they're doing something good, even though they're not. Yeah. But we can chart where the market thinks, where they're pricing in these cuts to be. And it's pretty much looks like probably by March or April of next year, they'll be actually cutting rates. So I think we sort of have this about 120-day window where asset prices could really move really fast.
And I want to just go back a sec to, Bitcoin specifically and the halving, because everything that we're talking about is going to affect the price of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And right now we think that, Bitcoin has these 4-year cycles. Well, historically speaking, it does according to the halving. But with everything that you're talking about and, the Bitcoin spot ETF that's potentially coming, how do you think that's going to affect Bitcoin's 4-year cycles? Do you think this is the last 4-year cycle? How do you see it going in the future?
So first thing I would say is that Bitcoin is the most price sensitive asset that we have because of the low liquidity that we have. And so it moves in advance of other markets. And so this is why this is important to understand. So I think Bitcoin is sniffing this out before other assets are. The other assets will catch up. And so what do I mean by that? The Fed had been lowering rates, keeping them low, doing all this easing, right? In November of 2021, the Fed made a statement that they were going to pivot and start tightening the market. They didn't actually do anything until, I believe, January, February of the next year. So the Fed doesn't want to scare markets. They don't want to surprise them. They try to tell them months in advance what they're going to do. As soon as they announced it, Bitcoin started selling off. November 2021 was the top.
Yeah.
A few weeks later, I think it was 2 to 3 weeks later, the NASDAQ, which is the tech stocks, they started selling off. So the more risk the asset is, the faster it will move. So Bitcoin started selling off first. Bitcoin realized the Fed was going to tighten first. Then NASDAQ, the S&P didn't start selling off for a few months later. And so now we see Bitcoin going up first, right? Then the NASDAQ, the tech stocks start to follow, and then the S&P 500. So I think it's important to understand that. Now, in light of the 4-year cycle, we just talked about what was interesting when Bitcoin started selling off. In these 4-year cycles, Bitcoin makes a top, an all-time high at about 18 months past the halving cycle,
Yeah.
which put it right at November of 2021. Now, because we haven't had that many of them yet, we're going on the fourth one, it's not like empirical evidence. It's not like 50 years or 500 years of data, right? It's like we've had a couple. And I sort of kind of got caught up, like a lot of people did, in like, well, the buyers of Bitcoin have changed, and we have long-term holders, and we have institutions now, and public companies aren't going to be forced to sell, so they're going to hold. And Michael Saylor's on TV saying that all your cycles are broken. And we also expected the top of Bitcoin in that last cycle to be much higher, 150,000 or whatever. So as we're getting to November of 2021, which we knew 18 months later was going to be the top, but it was like in the 60s. And we're like, no, this can't be it. The cycles are broken. It's going to be much higher. This time it's not right, but it was. So it's pretty interesting. Yeah, so I don't know. What was
No, I'm just trying to figure out just like how correlated Bitcoin is, because people talk about Bitcoin being this uncorrelated asset.
Well, correlated to what, right? It's correlated to liquidity.
Okay.
So if you look at the money supply is measured in what's called M2.
Yeah.
And if you look at M2 in the United States, it's been going down. The money supply has been going down. But if you look at global M2, it's been going up to the roof.
Okay.
And so if you overlay a chart of Bitcoin and global M2, they move almost together.
Okay.
So because, like I said, Bitcoin really starts to sniff that out. As far as correlation to other assets, it moves. Sometimes it becomes more correlated. Sometimes it becomes less correlated. The global financial system is very correlated in a sense because it all moves on liquidity. So when liquidity drops down, people start selling assets.
Okay, well, not just in terms of liquidity, but what about just geopolitically and everything that's going on right now? Because I know a lot of people didn't expect this pump just because of everything that we're seeing globally with wars, what's happening in the Middle East. America have said that they can fund both wars in Europe and the Middle East. So people were actually putting their money out. They weren't expecting the pump, and obviously that wasn't quite the case.
People that pull their money out don't understand how things work. So like I said, the global elites around the world, they've been moving to hard assets. While they're telling you fear, fear, fear,
right,
crash, 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 and everyone goes to cash, they're buying up all the assets. So they understand it. And I would say people that pulled their money out because of, hey, we're going to fight 2 wars, they didn't really understand what that means. So if the government's already broke, if the government's already borrowing 50% of their budget, and then they're going to spend more for wars, where are they going to get that money? Well, they're going to have to borrow even more. And that creates even more inflation. That means the money supply has to expand even more. And the bigger the deficit is, the more they have to borrow, which means the more has to be pumped. The more that they pump, then the more inflation they have, right? So I think people just didn't understand that dynamic probably, which is what we're seeing play out exactly right now. And I think both back to Ludwig von Mises, inflation being both permanent and intentional. So intentional meaning, do you think the governments are going to spend less money in the future?
No.
Like, of course, the answer is no. And then do you think inflation will be less in the future? Well, not if they don't stop spending, but also what we have on top of that. Remember, prices are equilibrium of supply and demand. So there's there's a million reasons, there's a trillion reasons why prices could move. So when they increase the money supply, you have more demand than there is supply. But what about if you cut supply as well? So for example, in war, supply chains break down, right? So now you have increased money supply because of the war, more money printing, but then you also have goods and services dropping, supply dropping because of demand or supply chains dropping. Now since really probably really since the pandemic, but probably more since the Russia-Ukraine invasion, you have basically this world breaking apart. And now, like, the United States is on a massive mission to reshore supply chains, right? So now we want to build microchips in the U.S. We want to build everything in the U.S. And every nation is doing that as well. And so that means that inflation goes up. Prices went down for the last 50 years because of globalization. So we took jobs for $50 in the US and then sent them overseas for $8. We took a $100 part here, made it for $8 in China. But now that's reversing. Now the $8 part is coming back to be $100. Now that job is coming back. And so this trend that we've seen for 50 years of prices going down is reversing. And now we'll start to see prices going up at the same time as we're seeing massive money printing. And so I think there's a massive, massive, massive move towards inflation in the future.
So this seems like the perfect opportunity to introduce Bitcoin and
Exactly.
sort of understand, how does Bitcoin solve these problems? You know, people refer to Bitcoin as a lot of different things, like digital gold, a hedge against inflation, a medium of exchange, all these different things. But to you, what's the most important use case for Bitcoin?
Well, I think there's one other big important use case, and I think we'll put these together. So one, we have this rise of inflation spending. Governments are continuing to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they want to spend more and more money. We've talked about that. But the second piece, part of back to them getting bigger and bigger and bigger, is the rise of authoritarianism.
Okay.
Right? And so back to, do you think governments will print more money or less money in the future? More. Do you think governments will decide to give us more of our freedom back in the future?
No.
Probably not, right? And so that's the second benefit of what Bitcoin does. And so authoritarians want control, and the best thing that they want to control, the main thing they want to control, is money. Henry Kissinger, who just died, I don't want to say RIP, it's more like good riddance to that guy, probably the biggest war criminal in the world, but he said control the food, control the people, control the energy, control the continent, control the
control the energy,
control the continent.
Oh, the continent, yeah.
Control the money, control the world.
Yeah.
So those are the attack vectors. Food. Right? So we see the attack on our food. In the United States, our food is horrible. They're trying to shut down cows. In California, the restaurants have to pay a 30% tax on pork.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Porks fart too much, and then methane and whatever, right? So it's like they're attacking the food. They're trying to shut down the farmers in the Netherlands, et cetera, right? So there's an attack on food. Then there's an attack on energy. Control the energy. Right? And now the money. So they want to control the money. That's the last piece. And so they want to see every single transaction, in the United States, if any transaction over $600, they want to like turn you upside down and shine the flashlight in there and see what's going on. Never mind the billions of dollars we're sending to Palestine or Israel or whatever, right? So they want to control that money. They want to not just see everything, they want to be able to control everything. So, in North Korea, in Afghanistan, these are extreme examples, but in North Korea, you can't even really have money, right? They want to see everything. In Afghanistan, the Taliban controls the bank, so you can't even send women money there, for example, right? And so we have this rise of authoritarianism. 2 billion people in the world have no access to banking because they don't have permission to join the banking system. And so Bitcoin fixes that as well. So if I put these together and sort of frame it up, and I put this in my talk in Bitcoin Amsterdam, solutions come to problems. Yeah. Entrepreneurs solve problems. We look at a problem in the world, we come up with a solution. So what are the big problems that we have? One, we have endless money printing. The problem is that humans, not to be sexist here, but humans have, human nature and emotions, and we have greed. And no human that has the ability to print money is not going to use that, right? So like they're always going to do this. Every time we've seen Zimbabwe throw their currency away and restart it 3 times, but they do the same thing every time because it's just human nature. So this endless money printing that can't be solved with humans, that's a big problem. So a solution would be to go to something with a fixed supply cap. We have another problem. We have a problem with permission. 2 billion adults in the world can't get access to banking. I believe like the smartphone is the great equalizer. Look what you do with your career, how much money you make with just like kind of your phone and kind of this, what you're doing right here. If you can get onto YouTube and learn anything, and you can get onto social media and meet anybody, and you could deliver services, like any kid in the world could make 6 figures online. But not if you're not allowed to join the banking system. If you just happen to be a 14-year-old kid from Iran, like, sorry, no banking system for you, right? So if the banking system is permissioned, and that's a problem, then we need permissionless. Right? If we have a problem with authoritarians trying to censor transactions, we need something that's censorship resistant. And so that's what Bitcoin has. It has all of those attributes, right? That's the utility that it gives us. And I think part of what we see in the United States, we talk about the ETFs and things like that. That's sort of like a local U.S. problem. But if we look globally, there's a massive demand for permissionless and censorship-resistant money.
Yeah, definitely. But what always strikes me, and we spoke about this actually last time when you were on the podcast, is what happens if they turn off the internet? Because I think it's very possible, not necessarily even turn off the internet, but control what we can and can't do. In Dubai, for example, you can't use certain websites. They're just simply blocked. I think like Zoom, for example, is blocked. So what do we do in a situation whereby these authoritarian elites or whoever they are turn off the internet? That makes your Bitcoin worthless, doesn't it?
And there is precedence for that. So in Egypt, during the Arab Spring, they had Egypt shut off the internet. So typically, most countries have 1 or 2 cables that they could just cut off and shut themselves off. I think the United States has 3. I think there's 1 in Los Angeles, 1 in D.C., and maybe 1 in New York. And so they could just shut that off. But think about that. Like, would they want to shut off the internet?
Maybe.
Well, it's a double-edged sword, right? And so this is what authoritarians have to grapple with. Either one, I can take away all freedom, no internet, no communication, no whatever, so I can maintain power. If I do that, my country is going to have no economic activity. We're going to have no inventions. We're going to have no industry. We have nothing. So we're in the dark ages. If I give them access to the tools, then we can have massive abundance, but how do I control it? So they're stuck in this conundrum or dilemma, if you would call it that, right? North Korea has gone to one extreme end, and look how bad things are. In North Korea, you have North Korea and South Korea. At night, you can see a picture, and South Korea is lit up, and North Korea is dark.
Right.
The average person is shorter in North Korea. The lifespan of people is less in North Korea. They have no economic growth. They have no invention. But in South Korea, they create TVs and all kinds of electronics, and they're flourishing, right? And that's because of the amount of freedom they have. So they could take away the internet and take away all that, but then they kind of shoot themselves in the foot. So they're trying to play both sides, which is why in Dubai or China, they give you the internet, but they sort of only give you the features they want you to have.
Exactly.
Now, how would Bitcoin work in that environment? So I just think that the chance of having no internet is very low.
Okay.
They could certainly censor it like they do in China and Dubai. I just don't see how they would want to go full North Korea.
Okay.
Like what nation would? So I think that attack vector isn't super there. Now, if they were to start cutting off the internet, I mean, that could certainly change things for sure. But of course, now we have satellite internet, right? So we could just get internet via Starlink.
But then that requires, but then you're trusting in one centralized entity for Bitcoin to work, Starlink.
So, yes and no, right? So that just relays signals. So let's just say that the U.S. decides to cut off the internet. Yeah. Great. So then we have game theory. Do you think El Salvador is going to cut off the internet? Do you think that Argentina? Do you think that Peru? Do you think that Australia? Do you think right on and on and on?
But what do we do living in the US if they were to cut off the internet? Because obviously we're not in El Salvador.
I mean, I think this is a very extreme hypothetical.
No,
example.
I don't think it's that extreme.
I mean, if whatever, I mean, you're talking about the U.S., but if whatever country you're living in decided to cut off the internet completely, you could move. People flee. I heard you on Peter Schiff talking to Peter Schiff, and you said people were fleeing, Ukraine, but they couldn't carry the gold with them, right? So people flee. This is what happens. People flee these nations. They left South Africa. They leave Iran. They leave whatever. They leave Russia, right? So I think you leave.
Yeah.
I think that's the easy answer. I just don't see that as the biggest attack vector, but I do see a massive attack vector on the censorship of the internet. So, for example, in the United States, I think it was 26 high-ranking members of government, senators, congressmen, signed an order called the Restrict Act. And it's a TikTok bill, right? But really, it's not about TikTok at all. As a matter of fact, if you dig into it, it says that any piece of technology that they deem to be a threat to national security could be made illegal.
Right.
And so now today, everything's a threat to national security. Like if you sow seeds of whatever misinformation, disinformation, if you say something that, messes with the trust or what the narrative of the government is trying to pass, they could say that's a threat to national security. So potentially they could say Bitcoin is being used to fund terrorism. It's a threat to national security, and they could make it illegal. So we know they can't shut it down. As a matter of fact, yesterday, Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan Chase said, if I was the government, I would shut it down. It's like, well, you can't. Mm-hmm. They could say, we'll kill you if we catch you with it. They could say that, right? They could say it's illegal. And so in this Restrict Act, you would face 20 years in prison, a loss of all your property, and $1 million fine. Mm-hmm. Like not even, like murder doesn't even get that. Like that's insane, right? So they could do that, and that would probably deter a lot of people from using it, but they can't stop it. So it would still be usable, even in that instance, right? The question would just be that I think that technology is outpacing the government. And this is sort of an interesting thing. I won't go in deep into this unless you want to dig into, but technology is what changes the world. When you go look through thousands of years of history, it changes the world in a lot of ways. But a couple core ways is it changes the way that we communicate, which then changes the way that we organize. So it changes the structure of our civilization, the structure of our government. So let me give a couple examples. In about the year 1080, there was a new piece of technology in Europe. It had been around in Asia before, but in Europe, and it was called a stirrup, like a horse stirrup. And that allowed a knight to get up onto a horse in full armor and to be able to fight from the horse. Now, Egyptians had fought with horses. They used chariots. The Romans used horses, but they would get off the horse to fight. Now they could fight on a horse. That allowed one knight to handle hundreds of serfs at a time. And that balance of power shifting like that led to the feudal system being created. So a very centralized form of government where you had king, the knights, and then the peasants serfed down at the bottom. So technology changed and created a new form of civilization and government. Mm-hmm. Now fast forward 500 years, 1500, we had a new technological revolution called gunpowder, and it's known as the gunpowder revolution. And now a serf with a gun could take out hundreds of knights, and the feudal system fell apart, and we went back to a decentralized system where now you had farms and cottages. Then we had the industrial revolution, which then brought everybody into cities and factories working for big corporations. And this is where it gets interesting. So in 1908 was the fourth industrial revolution, and that was the invention of the car, the automobile, gas and oil, but also mass production. So now everybody started working in factories. And this is really what was one of the biggest contributors to this growing middle class. We always hear about the middle class has been hollowed out, and it's because they shipped all our jobs to China, blah, blah, blah. That's part of it. But the big piece is that in this industrial revolution, in this mass production, everyone worked on an assembly line. And even though you may be way smarter than me, if we're on the assembly line together, we do the same job. So dumb people and smart people all were the same. So we had this massive middle class. Now, when I have this mass manufacturing, I have to come up with a new management system to manage the masses, like cogs in a wheel. And then we have mass management on mass corporations, and we created a government structure to manage that. But the type of government we have today is no longer compatible with the world that we live in. And this is the big problem that we're seeing. And so if you kind of keep that frame in mind, and then you sort of move forward, you look at the government trying to sort of maintain their grasp on a system that's just gone. They've been replaced. It's no longer there. And it's this technology that's changing it. So now we have this decentralized technology, and they can just no longer control it. And I think what happens is the more they try to control things, the more irrelevant and incompetent they look. So, for example, in Europe right now, they're trying to pass laws where you can't custody your own Bitcoin.
Yeah. Right?
And Elizabeth Warren's floating that here in the U.S. So they're going to make it illegal for me to know 12 words in my head.
Right.
So you can't know words anymore?
Yeah.
Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, it's ridiculous. I think the EU also would like people to literally screenshot their non-custodial wallets, as proof that they have them. So, I don't know how you would police that. I understand that they're going to police the on and off ramps. And they've already done that with the likes of crypto.com, for example. Now you have to actually, if you want to send money from a non-KYC wallet, a non-custodial wallet to the exchange, you have to say whether that's your wallet. So you have to KYC that non-custodial wallet. Yeah, it's pretty weird.
Really?
Yeah. Huh. And then like, I mean, not that, I would ever lie, but I don't know what happens if you do lie. Like, I don't know whether like they know and they'll be like, wrong answer. Like money is now frozen. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The problem is that we're trying to move into a new world, and we're trying to use old world rules. Yeah. And those two are no longer compatible. Jeff Booth would say that it's hard to imagine this new world when we're stuck in the world that we're in. So, for example, I was working on a project in El Salvador, and I was taking jobs down to El Salvador, and I actually brought smartphones down, and I gave them out to these people, and they were able to download an app and do jobs on the app and get paid in sats. And in order to, so I brought 10 phones with me, I gave 10 phones out, and they were able to just log in. Yeah. They didn't put any ID in there. There was no name, there was no social security number, there wasn't even a username.
What were they logging into though?
This app. It was an app.
Which app? Was it the El Salvador app? No. It wasn't the Shivo. Was it Shivo wallet?
No. It was an app to do work.
Sorry.
It was a work app.
Okay,
yeah.
Work app, yeah.
No, it was a work app. Okay. So they can do jobs on the phone, data entry jobs.
Understood.
What's called like micro tasks.
Yeah.
No, this was a job. So they on the phone, it had the app. They would do the jobs, and they would get paid in sats.
Got it.
All they had to do is put their Bitcoin address in there, and they would receive sats. Now in El Salvador, they can go spend those sats anywhere they want. They can go to McDonald's or Starbucks or the pupusa stand or the whatever they want, right? And so they've received payment in Bitcoin with no KYC. Yeah. Their name is not in the system anywhere, and then they can go spend the Bitcoin. So you talked about the choke point being the on and off ramps, but what about when there is no on and off ramps? What about when I've been paid in Bitcoin and I spend in Bitcoin? Then what? And so that's the new model, and that's where El Salvador is already at. I'm sure I know lots of people who live 100% on this Bitcoin standard. And when you look at more in your age range, if you look at like these millennials, you see videos every day popping up from like people in Canada and whatever, like they can't afford to live.
Yeah, it's insane.
They have no money. They're broke. They have no future. They can't afford to buy a house. They have no stocks, right? They don't have any money. So going back to the on and off ramps, haha, what are you going to do to me? I got no money anyway. Screw you. I'll just get paid in Bitcoin, right? And so we have this whole new generation that's coming up who there's no attack vector from the state for them. what is the state going to do? Take their money? They don't have any money, right? I'll just get paid in Bitcoin and I'll just spend in Bitcoin and screw you, right?
Yeah, especially with there just being more and more tech companies that are actually willing to pay in Bitcoin.
Yeah. And then back to the game theory. So if they want to go down to El Salvador, they can just get paid in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And now
what is game theory?
Game theory is who moves first.
Oh, understood. Okay,
you ever play the game musical chairs when you were a kid?
Yeah.
Right, so the music stops, and that's like game theory.
Okay.
So the game theory is like the U.S. could say, "Hey, no Bitcoin for us. Like we're not going to do it." But if the other nations adopt that, the game theory says their first mover advantage would give them advantage. Let me give you some historical examples of this. So lots of things had been money throughout history. Silver was actually one of the main forms of money in the 1400s, 1500s, when Spain was like the superpower. They discovered huge silver deposits in Peru. China had massive storeholds of silver. But what happened in the late 1800s is everybody started moving to the gold standard. And everyone started switching gold. China's like, I'm not switching to gold. We got silver. Screw you guys, right? Game theory. So what happened is China decided not to move to gold when the rest of the world did. And because they were the last one, finally they had lost so much value in their silver. They had lost so much power. They lost their position in the world and finally had to capitulate and say, fine, we'll move to gold. And so that's sort of like game theory, like being this last mover.
Okay, interesting. Speaking of, technology and innovations and all of that, one interesting thing that's happened this year is Ordinals. And we spoke yesterday a little bit about that, but I do want to get your take on it because it's kind of the question that everyone's asking everyone at the moment. If you believe in Bitcoin, you believe in free market capitalism. What's your take on Ordinals? For me personally, I'm very much a free market capitalist, and if that's what the network decides, then and the people decide, then so be it. But I know not everybody holds that opinion. So, are you pro Ordinals or are you anti Ordinals, Mark?
I think I would say let the market figure it out. As of right now, I don't really see a really good market fit for that. I think it's a little bit ridiculous what we've seen so far. And so I don't see that people would want to pay a lot of money for that. And so I think it sort of maybe falls away. Maybe they find a really cool use case for it and it succeeds in the market. So I think we'll have to see how it goes. The reason why I would say let the market figure it out is because what we already saw was when you start doing upgrades on the base layer, it leads to unintended consequences. And so now when we did the upgrade on Taproot, now we've enabled Ordinals. And now people don't like Ordinals, so now they want to go back to the base layer and tamper with it again. But what else happens after that? Now, I'm not the most qualified person. I'm not a Bitcoin Core developer, so I'll admit that. But I am smart enough to maybe see pattern recognition, and when you made a change, it created unintended consequence you don't want, so you want to go back and make another change, but what other consequence could be made at that point, right? Unintended consequence, I guess, would be made. So I don't know, and so what I would say is just let the market figure it out at this point. I think, some of the first use cases that we've seen, such as, these NFTs, if you will, right? Very, very poor versions of graphics. It seems very stupid to me. Certainly, under the belief that all value is subjective, so maybe there's value to somebody else. I don't think there was value in that, but that's not for me to decide. But I think that was sort of like testing out, gimmicky. We'll see how it goes. I have seen other things that make me a little bit more optimistic, such as at the Bitcoin conference in Amsterdam, Julian Assange from WikiLeaks, they set up a website where they're taking all of the WikiLeaks and putting them into the Bitcoin blockchain. So all of that data leak that has cost Julian Assange basically his life is now being recorded in these Ordinals in it. So like, okay, I guess that's pretty good. I mean, does that need to be done? Probably not, because the internet is already pretty decentralized anyway. So like, for example, maybe you're not old enough to remember, but we had like, Napster back in the day, which then led to like all types of file sharing, right? And so you could like download music and download movies and stuff, and like it's like little bits of data stored around everyone's computers, and like that's pretty censorship resistant. So like WikiLeaks could just be on that.
Right.
Now that takes people to seed it, and so if nobody seeds it, you can't download it. So there's problems within that. But I don't know if the Bitcoin blockchain is the best place for it, but it seems like a pretty good place for it because I know it's censorship resistant. The Bible, people have risked their life forever sneaking Bibles in and out of communist countries, and now it can just be on the blockchain. 3D gun schematics, right? If they want to take away our guns, then we can just get the gun schematics and print them. So I think there's some good examples of why we would need censorship resistant information. There's a movie made called, it's a book. It's a book written, and then there was a movie made about it, Fahrenheit 451.
Okay.
And the premise of the book is that there was another world war. The world got destroyed because there was too much information and people couldn't agree. There was two voices, and those two different camps went to war with each other. Sounds kind of familiar. So what they decided to do is get rid of every piece of information, and the government would be the single source of truth.
Yeah.
And that way they could prevent any other type of thing. Sounds very familiar. So then you had these groups of people that were protecting the books. And these people would not only, they'd have huge libraries of actual books, but they'd commit them to memory, right? And then there was the firemen were actually going and burning the books. Anyway, interesting book. There's a movie about it too. But anyway, so when you think about that type of environment, like there is certain information that we need to protect, we need to preserve, like the Bible or gun schematics or whatever, WikiLeaks or whatever. So it seems like it's a pretty good place to store it, I suppose. I don't see a really good use case for it. That seems interesting to me. I don't know if that's the best place to do that, but yeah, let the market figure it out.
But why are people so anti-ordinals? What's the problem with that?
Well,
other than stupid NFTs that, they don't like.
I think that's case number one. I think case number two is that it pushes up the transaction cost, right? So the block space, so Satoshi Nakamoto actually gave us multiple inventions, but two digital scarcities. So for the first time in history, we have something digitally scarce. So when I say digitally scarce, meaning with most digital files, if you take a picture on your phone and send it to me, I can send that to as many people as I want. So it's not digital scarcity. So Bitcoin created that digital scarcity, 21 million Bitcoin. But what he also created was finite block space. So about every 10 minutes, a new block is transacted, and it has the transactions in there. And there's only so much space that can be in there. So that's a finite amount, so then there's a bid for that. And so whoever bids the highest gets that block space. And so if ordinals take up that space, if an NFT does, then it pushes the price up for my transaction to send money, for example, right? So then they would say, oh, it's wasting block space. It's out-competing valid transactions or more important transactions. But I would say the more important transaction is the one that's willing to pay the most.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's probably why they're up in arms over it. I think one, they just think it's stupid. Two, they say it's, crowding out or out-competing financial transactions. And I think I would say the third final reason probably, and this is sort of more my reason, is that sort of my thing against ordinals, NFTs, and crypto just in general is because I come from a very freedom maximalist viewpoint where, you look at libertarians and all these people who scream at the wind and want to change the world, but they have no way to do that. And if you realize that the source of all the power of these authoritarians and governments, the WEF and all these people, come from the ability to print money. So really the only tool that we have is if we can take out the money printer. Like that's the attack vector. And there's one tool to do that. That's Bitcoin. Right? Bitcoin can do that. And so I look at it from a very strong freedom viewpoint. This is the tool that we have to win. And what happens is when you start talking about all these other crypto projects, it dilutes the message and it confuses most people. Most people just they're not as big of a nerd as I am, right? They're not down this rabbit hole, so they don't really understand the differences. And they're like, what do you mean Cardano's a scam? Look how much money I made. Yeah. And it's like, we're not in for this for the same reason. I'm not here for as much money as I can make.
Right.
I'm trying to change the world with a tool. And so I think it starts to dilute the message, and people don't realize like the power that Bitcoin has and what we can actually do with it. And I think for me, that's probably like my most important thing is just trying to keep that message pure. So.
Well, speaking of the message, and understanding that, the base layer has been upgraded and things are moving on and things are changing. Where do you see Bitcoin's role in society? So do you see it as, us moving on to a Bitcoin standard, Bitcoin being this global medium of exchange, or simply, just digital gold and a store of value? Like, where do you see, what is hyper Bitcoinization to you?
So I would say that there's an evolution. So when you look back, what is money? So money is a form of communication. So it communicates value. It's a way I can store my value until I'm ready to deploy that. And then when I give it to you, it communicates how much I value the thing that you have, right? So it's a medium of communication, medium of exchange. And throughout thousands of years of history, there's been lots of things that have been an MOE, medium of exchange, right? Some shells, feathers, rocks, gold, etc., right? And so what happens is they typically follow like this predictable path. And so first you start out as a collectible. It's like, oh, this is like pretty cool. Like, let me collect a couple of these things. If that if those collectively become big enough, it could potentially evolve into the next stage, which would be moving from a collectible to a store of value.
Right.
So you see the very wealthy storing a lot of their value in collectibles,
Okay.
fine art, old cars, things like that, right? But now they've gone from a collectible to a store of value. I'm storing my wealth there. Now maybe potentially if there's enough proper attributes, it could evolve to the next stage, which would be an MOE, medium of exchange. Cars will not be a good medium of exchange because in order to be a good medium of exchange, you have to have certain attributes. So it needs to be portable, divisible, durable, recognizable, sellable, things like that, right? So a car wouldn't work good because it's not really divisible. Bananas wouldn't work good because they're not durable, right? Gold does work good because it's most of those things, but it's not very portable,
Right.
right? So if potentially it meets those, it could go from a store of value to a medium of exchange. And then if it's successful at medium of exchange and gets enough adoption, if it's recognizable enough, it could then move to a unit of account. That'd be the final stage. So it's sort of like this evolutionary process. And so I think that Bitcoin beats every other thing in the world at the best attributes of moneyness.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we've already gone from the collectible stage to the store value stage. I think everyone agrees to that. And I think we're already into, not totally, but we've already started moving into the medium of exchange
For
place.
sure.
I mean, El Salvador is a prime example of that.
Yeah.
As we already said earlier, lots of people that we both know, I'm sure, live 100% on Bitcoin. So it is working as that. It's not widespread enough. So it's an evolutionary process. So probably, over the next, okay, and then, so medium exchange. And I would say I'm looking at it in a 50-year cycle. So I talked about the fourth industrial revolution. There's been 5 technological revolutions so far, and they're about every 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe Bitcoin is the 6th. Decentralized technology is the 6th. And it's like a 50-year process. So we're, 12, 13 years in at this point, like give it another 15, 20 years. So I think what will happen is we'll continue to see more and more people use it as a medium of exchange. That will probably continue for another, the rest of the decade. And then we'll start to see it becoming units of account. So right now, most things are priced in dollars, right?
Yeah.
So when the dollar was taken off the gold standard, so gold was the unit of account. Dollars were measured by how many ounces of gold they represented. Mm-hmm. You're from the UK.
Yeah, pounds.
A pound. What does the pound mean?
A pound of gold.
A pound sterling,
Yeah.
of sterling silver, right?
Yeah.
So precious metals were the unit of account. Paper referenced back to that. Now paper became this unit of account. But really what they did is they said that under the petrodollar agreement that oil would be the asset backing the paper. Mm-hmm. And so the unit of account is where instead of pricing things in dollars, we're pricing things in whatever that new currency is in Bitcoin, in sats or something like that.
So you said in 50 years you think Bitcoin would be the unit of account?
Well, I look at this as like this 50-year cycle. So I think, if I had to put time frames on it, I think probably by the end of the decade, I think it'll be pretty widely recognized as a medium of exchange.
And everything that we've spoken about, it's all about taking the power back, protecting property rights, liberty, freedom, protecting ourselves against inflation, tyrannical governments, authoritarian governments. So, and then I know we've also spoken about the fact that they can't really stop Bitcoin, but it's still just, I still just wonder, whether they could do something to stop this. Because, this sounds like, the quite the opposite of a dystopian future. It sounds like the
let's do a thought experiment, Layah.
Utopia. It sounds like the perfect utopia. There you go. That's the word.
Dystopia.
Utopia.
Oh, utopia.
Yeah, of course. If Bitcoin is the the unit of account and we're all free, we have all these property rights, everything is great. There's no more inflation. It sounds like the perfect utopia that they just would never let happen. What's the experiment? Let's do it.
Well, the goal is to take away their ability to stop that from happening.
Right.
Right. And so that's the difference, right? So libertarians want to pass laws, but laws are written by men, and men are always going to do this. And so if we understand the source of their power is money and we take away that power, then maybe they have no chance to stop it. But let's do a thought experiment. What are things the government has tried to stop successfully in the past? Let's just look through them. So the U.S. has had a war on obesity. Does the U.S. have more obesity or less?
More, but I don't think they're really trying to stop it.
Okay, they have a war on drugs. They spent $3 trillion on drugs. What's the number one cause of death?
I still feel like that they injected drugs into the system.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm running all those guys.
The U.S. government is responsible for bringing fentanyl into the country.
I actually don't know enough about this, but apparently, maybe you know more and you can tell me. In the 80s, I don't know, the US government is responsible for all the, what was it, like
cocaine into Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So that's a little story.
And they helped the Mexicans, the cartels.
It wasn't the Mexicans. So it was under the Iran-Contra.
Okay.
So what was happening is that the CIA, which is like a rogue government agency, constantly trying to overthrow governments, right? So that's a division of the U.S. government that is just like I said, rogue and should just be shut down. They're dangerous, but they just constantly throw around. They constantly do illegal operations to overthrow governments. And during the Iran-Contra, they wanted to overthrow the government down in Iran, or in Nicaragua, but they couldn't do it legally through the United States, so they did it illegally. So they needed money. So where are they going to get the money? Well, they got cocaine, and they brought it to Los Angeles and sold it in Los Angeles and got the money. And then they took the money to Iran and bought the weapons, and they brought the weapons back to Nicaragua.
Okay.
All right. So that is true. That's documented, and we know that. So they did bring some cocaine to LA and sell it. I don't think they're bringing fentanyl into the country.
Okay.
And so the point of this is that they've spent about $3 trillion on the war on drugs, but drugs are a bigger problem today than they were before the start of the war. And think about drugs. Drugs are physical, meaning I have to grow it, I have to cultivate it, I have to process it, package it, ship it, smuggle it, and then distribute it. It's physical. I can catch you and find drugs on you. How do they stop something totally digital? What about the war on terrorism? Terrorism is a much bigger problem today than when they started the war on terrorism. So every time the government tries to stop something with a war on whatever, it's only gotten bigger and badder and worse. And so the other thing is, like, they spent $3 trillion to stop drugs, and drugs are a bigger problem today. The number one cause of death from 18 to 35 is fentanyl overdose. They can't stop that. And so they can't even stop drugs from being in prison. I mean, the most secure place in the world, they can't even stop that. So if they can't stop something physical, how do they stop something digital? And then you always have to go back. Understanding Bitcoin is difficult because you have to understand a bunch of different disciplines. One of which is like understanding philosophy, if you will, but like human incentives. So for example, when I tell you that you shouldn't do drugs, it doesn't really make you want to do them because you know they're dangerous. If I say don't do heroin, it doesn't say, well, I'm going to go do heroin because Mark told me not to. Yeah. But if I say that you don't have a right to store your wealth in a way that I can't steal from you, then it kind of makes you want to do that, which is why every time they talk about putting new measures against gun rights in the U.S., gun sales go through the roof. Every time they talk about it, people go buy guns, right? And so if they try to say, hey, you don't have a right to store your wealth that we can't steal from you, then people are going to want to do that. So it changes the incentives as well. So I just think it's just not going to be possible. Now, could they curtail it? I mean, sure, there's lots of people that don't want to break the law, right? Plenty, but there's a lot of people that do. And so there's plenty of people still going to prison over drugs, but most people don't. So I guess potentially it could slow down the adoption. And I think I was asked this on Gary Cardone's show earlier this week, what I think the biggest attack vectors are. And I said that I think the attack vector they're coming for Elizabeth Warren is probably going to be in conjunction with BlackRock and ETFs in general, and just say, you can own Bitcoin. Bitcoin's not illegal, but you own it through ETFs.
Exactly.
Self-custody is illegal.
Exactly.
That's what I think is the attack vector. Now, what happens in that case? Well, the U.S. still participates in Bitcoin. You and I can't hold it legally, technically, maybe, but then back to game theory. Well, then just El Salvador's got it.
Yeah.
Right, or whatever.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I also have the same opinion. You can't stop Bitcoin, but if that was the attack vector which they go for and they make it illegal, then I find it illegal to hold non-KYC Bitcoin. Then I find it difficult to imagine a world where Bitcoin is, the unit of account, just because they make it so difficult. But I definitely think that Bitcoin is the future, but I think it's going to be controlled through major institutions like BlackRock. That's how I think about it.
They can't force that.
Right, they can't.
They can make a law. They can say, we'll kill you if you don't hold it in. They can do that, but they can't do it for the whole world.
Right.
And so the more they do that, they'll only put problems on themselves into a system that's already crumbling. And so back to this 50-year experiment. The experiment's up. Like, we have another decade at best. Like, this experiment's over. So you have to think in long periods of time. The UK was the superpower before the US. The sterling was the global reserve currency before the US dollar. The dollar did take that over, but it was about a 30 to 40 year process that happened. So we have to start thinking in terms of decades and not years. And so I think everyone's expecting way too much too soon.
Right.
So if you think, okay, well, the US dollar took over from the pound sterling over 30 or 40 years, what happens in 20 years from now? And so I just think that things are changing very rapidly. I think you can see it. Most people don't understand where these changes actually lead to. But where these changes actually lead to is technology has moved so fast. The current form of government we have is no longer compatible. The current form of government that we have is dying. In their dying grasp, like a caged animal, they're lashing out, trying to hang on to whatever power they have. Physics says that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So the more they try to control, the more entrepreneurs try to set up systems to get out of it. The more people get out of it, the more they try to control. But the more they control, the more people move out of it. And more people move out of it, they try to control. And it's like a reinforcing wheel. And as they're dying, as their power continues to diminish, as the money printer continues to have diminishing returns, as new technology continues to advance forward, I think they just fall further and further behind. And so if I think in decades or 2 decades, I think this whole system looks different. The world looks different.
Well, something which is developing very fast is AI. I don't know what your opinions are actually on AI, so feel free to get into that. But where do you think AI and Bitcoin meet? Do you think it would be add any value to Bitcoin? Do you think AI could be an issue for Bitcoin? What's your take on the relationship between Bitcoin and AI?
One thing that's interesting, if I think about where, in decades, right? Bitcoin is, as I already said, borderless, permissionless, censorship resistant, immutable. Bitcoin is also personless. So what does that mean? Personless. Well, that means that in order to get a bank account, you have to be a person. You have to prove that you're a person, right? But with Bitcoin, you just need a Bitcoin wallet address and you can receive Bitcoin. So in light of AI, and humans are no good at imagining the future because all we can do is imagine better versions of what we have today.
Exactly. Yeah.
What happens is when we get new sets of building blocks, we can build things we hadn't imagined before. So that's why it never works out. But let's just think about what we could see. So, we've heard a lot about Tesla's self-driving and potentially doing like Airbnb or Uber on their own, right? So like a car could literally, by AI, could be like its own thing, right? Well, that car could have its own Bitcoin wallet. So now you have a car running on AI that's running its own business that has its pays and sells, makes its own revenue, profit and loss, whatever. And it's not a person, it's personless. Bitcoin could be personless. Now, was it Sam Altman with that WorldCoin was trying to solve that, right? He said if you scan your retina, you'll prove you're a person. That's what he was trying to do, prove you're a person. Bitcoin's personless. So I think there could be some overlaps with Bitcoin and AI. As far as AI goes, I'm not really that deep into the weeds on the technology. I would say kind of my thoughts on it are, it has a lot of potential. It's very dangerous. I don't think it's as scary. I'm not as scared of it as most people seem to be. I don't think it's as scary. And I know there's certainly 2 different camps of this, and some of these people are way smarter than me, but I think I don't see AI as this threat that becomes smarter than humans and destroys the world.
Don't.
No, I don't see that.
I do.
There's 2 reasons why I don't. The first reason why is because, very broadly speaking, and again, I'm not an expert, but I am a tech guy. Broadly speaking, there's 2 types of AI. There's what we call narrow AI and broad or general AI. So narrow AI is where I train an AI on a very specific task, like play chess or play this video game or drive this car. Now, we've gotten massive, massive advancements in narrow AI, as we can see ChatGPT or driving cars and all these things. Massive advancement, and it's moving very fast, very fast. But in general or broad AI, we've had almost no advancement. Now, about a year ago, I got to sit down with Naval Ramakant, and he's like, prolific Silicon Valley VC. And I asked him this specific question. And what he told me, this is about a year ago, so his mind might have changed, disclaimer. But he said that for broad and general AI, there's been almost no advancement since the 70s.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The human brain is so intricate and so complex that we can't even comprehend the power of one brain cell. It's so massive and so complex. And so we haven't been able to figure out how to build an AI that could have that much brain power capacity. So that's like a technical side. The other reason, people might not appreciate this side, but we all have sort of this worldview. Every one of us has a lens that we view the world through. I view the lens of the world as that we were created. This isn't a random world that we live in. If you look at the intricacies of the human body or the world, everything hangs on a razor's edge. If I took a Rolex watch and took it completely apart and put it into a box and shook it for 100 million years, there's no chance that watch goes perfectly back together and is on time. There's just no chance of that. And that's if I had all the parts already there. Like this world did not just randomly come together. So I believe it was created. And I believe that we are creative. We have creative capabilities. And I don't believe that a machine can take that over. Right. I don't believe a machine could ever be as creative as that. Now, ever is a big term, maybe in 1,000 years or something like that. But that's a technical reason. And that's sort of like my worldview reason. And so feel free to disagree with that.
No, I thought that was really interesting. I've never heard someone talk about a Rolex being shaken and being, that's an interesting way to put it. But so just to go back a sec, so how do you think we're created? You think we were like purposely created by a god? You think that? Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Interesting. Yeah, that's another podcast.
It's another podcast. So for sure, we could certainly go down deep into that. I think what's interesting is in the Bitcoin space specifically, you see more and more and more and more people come to that realization, because once you start to like open up your mind and really start to think deeply about these things, I mean, it's just the natural conclusion that you come to. And at the end of the day, I said there's kind of two camps. And the reason why there's two camps is we all have to have faith in something. I think it's ridiculous that a God would create us. Well, I think it's ridiculous that we came from nothing, right? We all have to believe something that we don't really have proof of. The question that I would ask, and we can put this on another podcast, but like, if you think about it, like, okay, so we evolved.
Yeah.
Let's just chase that down. So we came from monkeys, which came from amoebas, which came from whatever. Cool. Where did life come from? Like, how did something become alive, though? And there's no answer for that, right? I've studied evolution, right? So there's no answer for that. So where did life actually come from, even if we did evolve? Now we can get into evolution. So why don't we still see species in some form of evolution? Like, where are the half monkey, half men? Like, where are they anymore? Right? They're not still evolving. Like, that's pretty interesting. But where did life come from? And there's no answer for that. And anyway, so that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, no, I love it. We'll have to have that conversation. I talk about that actually a lot with my brother. We talk about evolution and where everything comes from. But let's just finish on crypto for a second. Where do you think, how do you see the next 2 years playing out?
I'm just going to say one thing real quick too, like in the United States Constitution, it talks about inalienable rights, God-given inalienable rights. And so going back to be a freedom maximalist, like I believe in what our founding fathers believed in, which is God-given inalienable rights. So our rights were not given to us by men. Men do not have the power to control us or give us freedom. God gave us these rights. And the Constitution was set up to control the government from infringing on those rights, not giving us rights, but keep them from taking the natural God-given rights. And so if you don't believe in that, then then you would also believe that we don't have rights. Then rights were given to us by men. So anyway, different worldview. But anyway.
No, it's interesting. No, I appreciate that. It's interesting. No, I just want to get your take on the next 2 years and how it's going to look in the market.
Yeah. So let's start talking about where we'll be in 2 years from now, and then we'll talk about how we get there.
Okay.
All right. So I think the reason why I say that is I think the longer we look out, the easier it is to sort of understand where things are, but we don't know the trials and tribulations from there. I think before we recorded, we were talking about your workouts or whatever, right? So let's say that like I had a goal that I wanted to put on 20 pounds of muscle. So I'm going to change my workouts. I'm going to change my diet, do all these things. And I know that if I increase my calorie intake by 25% for the next 2 years, I'll put on 20 pounds. So I know if I do this every day for 20 years, I'll get to that goal. But where will I be in 3 months? I don't really know. Where will I be in 9 months? I'm not really sure. But I'm pretty sure in 2 years, right? And so like the longer time frame helps us a little bit. So let's start with that. So if we understand some of the constraints that we have. So we already talked about one, are the governments printing more money or less? Are we talking about from a financial standpoint? Okay, let's talk about from money side first. We can talk about freedom later. So from a money side.
Yeah, for sure.
So if you understand math and you understand the natural constraints of math and the fiscal situation we have in the United States and the governments of the world, the ECB, the Euro, the BOJ, China right now, I mean, it's just crazy. They have to continue printing more money because we're in a debt-based monetary system. What that means, we already talked about, money is created through debt issuance. So what that means is dollars are liabilities and the debt is the asset. And if you understand that, then the asset is what's the collateral to get more debt. So then all of our system is built on collateral, stacked on collateral, stacked on collateral. If the valuations of that collateral starts to drop, then margin calls are required, and then the whole system collapses. If you think about the world being controlled by, let's call it the bankers and the corporations, they don't want to lose control of that. They can't allow that system to collapse. So we have to keep it propped up. We're in a Ponzi scheme. So we have to keep propping that up. We know just in the U.S. Government, for example, again, we have to print or we have to borrow 50% of our budget, and that's only getting worse. And so we have to keep printing money. There's just no way around it. I believe that we'll see at least double-digit inflation probably for the rest of the decade.
And will they be honest about that? Because
no, of course not. Okay. No, and it'll come in waves. So inflation will ramp up and go back down. So, like for example, in the 1940s, we saw inflation go up to 19% and then -2, and then back up to 18, and then 0, and then back up to 16. So I think we'll see it's going to be like this. But I think the big trend, and that's why I say further out, because it's going to be so wavy. It's hard to know exactly where we'll be in 6 months or 9 months. But I think in 2 or 3 years, home prices are up 50%. Gas prices are up 50%. Pretty much all assets will be up, 50% at least in the next 2 or 3 years because of that. So I think that's where we're at. That's why when everyone's talking about, oh my God, the housing market's going to collapse. And I bought a house 2 years ago, and Mark, you're an idiot. You're buying at the top of the market and blah, blah, blah. It's like, don't you know it's going to be cut in half? I don't care.
Yeah.
Because in 30 years from now, it's going to be worth a lot more, right? So I think in 2 or 3 years from now, everything's up 50% or more because of the massive amount of money printing that we have to print. Now, how do we get from here to there? I think this year, going into 2024 right now, 2023 is closed. It depends on when the recording comes out. But everyone's been predicting this recession and this market crash since 2022. And then 2020. Don't you know when the Fed raises rates that stocks have to reprice? They have to reprice down. Don't you know when mortgage rates go from 0 to 8% that home prices have to? They've had to for 2 years and they haven't. Right? So 2023 is in the books. The quarter's done. A recession will be 2 quarters, and so we don't have 2 quarters left. I think we're good through Q1 of next year, 2024, and then we'll see what happens. Right now, the market's sort of pricing in some Fed rate cuts starting in March or April of next year, and typically that is not a good sign. They're typically cutting because things are already getting so bad. So it's possible that we have a recession, which could lead to some asset price deflation, we'll call it that. So weakness in the stock market, the home prices, things like that. But I think whatever we see will be pretty moderate, in my opinion. But this isn't a good thing. So what I'm actually predicting is the opposite of what most people think. Most people are afraid, you talked about earlier, on the sidelines because they think there's this big crash coming. I think there's a crash coming too, but it's different than what most people think. So most people are afraid of a crash because their standard of living will go down. If I lose my job and I have to take a lower paying job, if my sponsors don't pay me as much, if my retirement account goes down, I have to lower the quality of my life. I have to move to a smaller house. I can't go out to eat as much, things like that, right? So a crash, then we would say, is my standard of living goes down. But what I think is the opposite of that, but it's the same result. So I think there's a crash coming, but instead of a deflationary crash, it's an inflationary crash. And that means that prices move up so fast, I still can't afford my standard of living. Because home prices went up so much, I can't afford the same house. Because food prices went up, I can't afford to go out to eat so much. So the result is the same. It's still a crash, but it went up instead of down. Now, there's a couple big differences within that. So let's just say I think that's what we're facing over the next couple of years, which is why home prices, all those things go up. I think potentially we could see weakness going into 2024, except for that we have an election year.
Right.
No incumbent president has ever won in a recession.
Okay.
All right. So that's sort of what happened with Trump. They sort of crashed the market, right, going into that election. So if the Democrats want to win, if they want to stay in power, which I think they do, and if they sort of control the market, which they kind of do, then they're going to do everything in their power to make sure there's not a recession this year. All right. So we have that going for us. And I think the other thing is that people don't realize how the Fed and the central banks around the world have changed how they work in the market since 2008. So everyone's like, oh, but Mark, look at 1970 and look at 1940 and look at 1929. The Fed wasn't interacting in the markets like they do today. So in 2008, they started quantitative easing. It was the first time we've seen that. And so now, like in 2008, it took 7 months after Bear Stearns collapse, which was like the bank that collapsed that triggered the great financial crash. It took the Fed 7 months to come up with any type of program. When the banks collapsed in 2023, it took them 6 days. Right. When in 2008 the markets crashed 65%. In 2020 they crashed 30%. Yeah. And in 2008 it took 7 years to come back. In 2020 it took 6 months. And so if it happens again, I think it goes down by 15% and it comes back in 3 months. And instead of $1 trillion in '08 instead of $10 trillion in 2020, it'll be $20 trillion. So I think there could be a potential little crash. I think they'll probably overreact, blow it sky high. That's why I don't know exactly where that fits, like month by month kind of a thing. I think 2024 to me looks like a stagflationary period, meaning high inflation and low economic growth. So people continue to get further and further behind. Maybe your pay goes up a little bit, but prices are moving up faster. And so everyone's standard of living is going down. Nothing really crashes. Nothing really grows. It's not good. Now, a deflationary crash would be better, because what it does is it rips the Band-Aid off. And now millennials can buy houses and they can buy stocks at good prices. But the problem that I think we're having is that we're not going to get that good entry. And if you don't get in now, you're only going to fall further and further behind. Like, everyone thinks that the housing market has to crash. Who's going to be able to pay these prices with these crazy mortgage rates? Well, 40% of the homes are owned in pure cash. And most of the homes being bought today are being bought with 50% down payments, because people have cash because they've owned a home. So if you own a home, you can sell that and buy another home. If you don't own a home, it's very difficult to get in. And I think that problem just continues to get worse.
So what about Bitcoin then? Do you think that the halving's already priced in? How do you see Bitcoin playing out over the next 2 years?
No, it's certainly not priced in. You know, I mean, when I say it's not priced in, it's priced in for where it needs to be at this time. So people are front running it. You know, looking at just, you know, Bitcoin halving cycle history, I mean, it looks like we'll be at $150,000 a Bitcoin.
Is that your prediction is that your all-time high prediction for this cycle?
I typically don't try to make these predictions. I don't even really think them through, so I don't want to make them, because I haven't really looked at the charts and really tried to think it through. But I think 150,000 seems pretty
conservative.
Pretty conservative for this. I think getting to $1 million by the end of the decade seems more likely.
Really?
Yeah.
End of the decade?
Yeah, I think by the end of the decade, $1 million. But you have to also understand that $1 million doesn't mean much at that point. Right?
Exactly.
In Zimbabwe, everybody became a billionaire, but it was $350 billion for one egg.
Yeah. It's ridiculous. That's
crazy. Something like that, right? So it's like even today, $1 million is not like when I was a kid, $1 millionaire was like a big deal, and now $1 million is like barely. I mean, in California, you make $1 million, half goes to the state, so you end up with 500,000. In my town, the median price of a home in my town is $1.6 million. So you just get the median home price of $1.6 million. You have 2 kids in school, and then you have 2 brand new cars that you make car payments on. You're broke.
Yeah, you're not even middle class anymore.
Like, you're broke at $1 million. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. What's interesting is the cost of living in general is way more in America than it is in the UK. That's one thing that really sort of surprised me. Just moving here, the cost of living is much higher here.
When you're in Miami too.
Yeah, of course, but just in the States in general. But then the salary is higher here as well. Like, you earn more here. There is more opportunity. That's just something which has fascinated me since being here. Because $1 million pound house at home, that's like a big deal. That's like a nice house, you know. Whereas here, it's like, can't really get much.
Well, there's plenty of places in Florida where $1 million home still is really nice.
Okay.
Right.
And
you can move to Middle America, Missouri or Kansas, or whatever, Oklahoma. There's $1 million buys you an estate.
But in London, like, you can get like a really nice house for like $2 million, whereas like here,
not in Miami.
Exactly,
not
which is so fascinating to me. That's been really interesting.
Yeah.
So what are you working on now?
What about all the lizard people we're going to talk about?
Oh my God. You know what? I had David Icke on the show, and because obviously he's the guy behind that theory. And they took it down, and I got a strike.
Oh, really?
So you know, Mark, you know, I have my opinions, and I'm just deciding on what opinions I wish to share these days. Yeah.
I was just kidding.
No, but seriously, I'm just very calculated. More calculated these days than I ever was.
You have to be, unfortunately. I remember the first day that I found myself censoring what I was going to talk about on YouTube. And I can still remember the feeling of just like, I can't believe it's come to this. Wow. But it is what it is, right? We're in somebody else's sandbox, and I guess we have to play by the rules, I guess. Right?
I will add as well, there's another reason to censor yourself. It's not just like getting censored by YouTube and things like that. It's also just like playing the game, you know? Like, you don't have to, not everybody has to know your opinion on everything.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You know? Yeah. So that's something I've learned recently as well.
Yeah. No, I just thought we were going to talk about some other topics. But what am I working on? So a bunch of things. So one, creating as much content as I can, which I think I'm going to try to pull back on some of that in 2024. It's just gotten a little bit too much for me.
Yeah.
So I could focus more on business stuff. So I have the nationally syndicated radio show on iHeart. I got the podcast. I got the YouTube channel. I'm putting out about 6 hours of content a week just in that alone, plus going on other shows, things like that. That's a lot. I have like education courses and a newsletter that I write in the investment space. I've been doing, over the last couple of years, I've been doing my own events, Market Disruptors Live. I've been doing some really high ticket coaching. So I've been doing that. And lately I've taken some equity positions in some companies that I'm actively working in and helping them grow. I've been an investor and advisor for over a decade, and I'm an advisor and an investor in TVP Channel Venture Partners, which is a venture capital fund in the Bitcoin space. I'm a partner in the Bitcoin Opportunity Fund, which is a new investment vehicle for the Bitcoin space as well. We just did a couple big deals. We did a deal with Jack Dorsey, just did a new Bitcoin mining pool. Yeah, so we were one of the key investors in that deal. So we've done a couple deals there. So trying to help the ecosystem grow. I'm a big believer in building the world that you want, right? And a lot of times people in the Bitcoin space specifically think they can just go buy their Bitcoin and go hodl and like the whole world's going to change, but it's like not like that. Yeah. So like I believe in building the world that we want. So like with these funds, we're really trying to get money and deploy it to build this world, right? To like build this ecosystem to one day be able to use it as a medium of exchange. Doing that and then speaking a lot, which I think I'm going to try and slow my speaking down in 2024 as well. So content, education, coaching, and then investing and building. Yeah,
you're doing a million things. Every time I see you, you're working on a million different things. Yeah. You told me yesterday you'll be building a house in Mexico.
Yeah,
there's just a lot going on.
Yeah, I built a house in Texas, outside of Austin, a ranch. Acreage property. I got 5 cows and 8 goats and donkeys, and like that's sort of like my bug out spot maybe if I need it. If I get out of California, then I got the place in Mexico going as well. So just trying to build options. You know, the world is uncertain, and we beat uncertainty with optionality. And so just trying to build as many options as we can.
That's amazing. Where can people find you and get in touch with you?
I'm not hard to find. Just search Mark Moss. onemarkmoss.com is my website. I got locked out of my Twitter account 4 months ago, and I've been out. Yeah, some hacker got in and changed my 2FA, and
you're not on Twitter?
I haven't been for 4 months.
Wow.
Yeah, someone took over my account and posted a bunch of like NFT crypto stuff on there, and I've been able to get in. So,
what are you doing about it?
I've filled out like 30 support requests
and nothing.
And they keep charging me my $8 every single month, and they just won't respond to my support tickets. So. That kind of sucks, but hopefully I'll be back soon.
Yeah.
I've been trying to connect to everybody. I met somebody last night at the party who says, "Oh, I know someone at Twitter. I'll get you turned back."
Why don't you just start again? Why have you started a new Twitter? We'd all repost you and tell everyone to follow you. What do you mean? Like?
Yeah, no. I mean, I could. You know, I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, if you care enough, that's what I would do. In the meantime,
well, I think I'm going to get it back. I mean, I've talked to many people who know people inside.
But in the meantime, just grow it, and then you have it as a backup in case anything were to happen again.
I don't know. So as a content creator, going back to kind of like self-censoring things like that, like getting your platforms taken from you is like the worst thing that can happen.
It's really disheartening. Yeah.
And part of another project I'm an advisor and investor for, Zion, is sort of trying to build a new platform that's built on Bitcoin and Lightning. And like, I just thought, I don't want to build another platform on somebody else's platform. If I'm going to build another platform, I'll go do it on Nostr. I'll go do it on Zion. If I'm going to build another platform, I'll do it there. So I'm kind of like, if I can't get my Twitter account back, then screw Twitter. I think I'm over it.
Yeah, that makes sense. This was like a divine intervention telling you, it's time to be done with these centralized platforms.
Yeah, because basically. So then what? So then I'll spend another couple years building up another one, and they'll take that from me too. And they didn't take it from me. A hacker just went and changed my friggin' password, and they just won't even respond to like change my password back. So I don't know. Part of me is just like, if I can't get it back, then I'm probably just gonna be over it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
All right. Well, I hope you get it back.
Yeah, me too.
But Mark, thank you so much.
If you know anybody in Twitter, hit me up.
Yeah, exactly. I'll ask around for you. I'll see what I can do. I didn't know that happened, so that sucks.
Yeah.
But I'll definitely try and help.
Thank you.
Mark, thank you so much for coming on. It's always such a pleasure.
Yeah.
I always learn so much from you. So I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
Good time.
Guys, make sure you follow Mark. Always so much interesting content he's putting out. There's always so much to learn from Mark. And guys, if you did enjoy this podcast, then please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, as we have a lot more content coming. We'll see you next week.